I'm Justice Kathleen O'Leary from the 4th District Court of Appeal, Division 3 in Santa Ana. It's my privilege today to be interviewing Justice Raymond Ikola of my court for the Oral History Project for the Appellate Courts, the Legacy Project. So with that brief introduction, Justice Ikola, from here on out, it's Ray. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay, and first name basis with me too.
So you're KO.
I'm KO.
All right.
So let's start at the very beginning. Where were you born and where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in a small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, known fondly to the locals as the UP. Folks from the UP are known as Upers. But the town I grew up in was named Ishpeming, which is a Chippewa Indian name, which means heaven or the high place. Not to be confused with the town 3 miles away called Negaunee, which supposedly was Chippewa Indian for the low place or hell. So I grew up in heaven.
And I know a little bit about the UP from you. There's a particular delicacy, that meat pie.
It's called a pasty.
And that's one of your favorite meals, isn't it?
It certainly is.
If it's made properly.
My mother always would say, you see the Ishpeming and the whole Upper Peninsula in that area was an iron mining range, underground iron mining. And many iron miners came to that area of the country from Wales. I guess they have mining in Wales, England. And they brought the pasty with them. And my mother used to say, well, they invented the pasty, but the Finns perfected it.
How about anything else about your family you'd like to share with us? Father, siblings?
Well, my father was the principal of a junior high school, intermediate school. My mother was a teacher, elementary school teacher. And I have one older brother, 9 years older than I, who became a pediatrician. So that's my family, my immediate family.
Now, sometimes people have other influential members in their family, a grandparent, an aunt, maybe just not a family member, but a community member. Anybody, any lawyers early on, or anybody else that was influential?
No, certainly no lawyers. One of the big regrets in my life, I suppose, is that I was not attracted to the law until somewhat later in life. And part of that, I think, was because I did not have any lawyers as role models. Although I will say that I did have a newspaper route, or delivered newspapers, and one of my clients was the author of the book Anatomy of a Murder, which sometime later became an auto-preminger film. It was based on a true story in the area where I grew up, and the author of that book was on my newspaper route.
So the UP can claim celebrities other than you?
Apparently.
And I'm gathering you went to high school.
I did.
On the UP?
In the UP, in Ishpeming High School.
Okay, I'm skipping pronouncing that word. I'm just going to call it that town in the
All
UP.
right.
And where did you go to college?
Well, then I went to the University of Michigan.
Okay, and that was how far from where you grew up?
Around 500 miles, give or take.
Okay, so it was really going away to school.
It was going away to school.
Okay, and what was your major?
Electrical engineering.
And the reason you would select electrical engineering as a major, I'm just curious.
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, as I was growing up, I was a radio amateur radio operator, known as radio hams in those days. Maybe they still are. I really have lost touch with that world. So I built transmitters and receivers and communicated with other radio hams around the nation and the world. And so that was an interest I had as a boy growing up. And then in my senior year in high school, the Soviet Union, at that time, there was a Soviet Union, launched 2 Earth satellites, Sputnik, in the fall of 1957. And nationwide there was a hue and cry about our country falling behind in science and technology. And we needed more scientists, we needed more engineers. Some of that same hue and cry is being heard now, of course, with the urging of people who do STEM careers. But I was good at math, I was good at science, and I had this background with amateur radio. So electrical engineering just seemed like a natural choice at the time.
So you were STEM before it was really the in thing to be. You were a trendsetter?
I don't know, I was a trendsetter, but that's what I did.
Okay. And when you were at Michigan, any extracurricular activities of note?
Well, my first year at the university, I was a member of the Michigan Marching Band. That was about then I was a member of a fraternity after that.
What'd you play in the marching band?
Clarinet.
Okay.
And I did not go out for the band my second year. As I recall, I had enrolled for 19 semester credit hours in my sophomore year, fall, and you just simply could not spend the time with the marching band that's required to carry that sort of load.
I'm guessing that engineering, there were no real easy electives.
The easiest elective I had was a course called Astronomy 101. And strangely enough, most of the Michigan football team was enrolled in that course.
And you had said that your interest in law was a late interest. It wasn't your initial interest. So I'm guessing that after you left college, you went on to do something not in law.
Well, yeah, I stayed at Michigan, University of Michigan, finished a master's degree in electrical engineering. And then I got a job, which was just a plum job at the time, as a member of the technical staff at RCA Laboratories in Princeton, New Jersey.
And by this time you were married, right?
I was married.
So you moved the family to New Jersey from Michigan?
Yes.
Okay.
And the family being my wife, and I think when we made the move, Kristen, our oldest child, was about 2 weeks old.
And how long did you stay with RCA and in the engineering field?
I was with RCA for a total of 8 years, from 1963 to 1971.
And somewhere along the line, I think you got a doctorate in engineering?
Yes. Well, what happened at the RCA labs, almost all members of the technical staff had PhDs. And so long term, if I intended to stay there, it was almost a given that I'd have to continue to get that. So I applied for a fellowship from RCA while I was there. And they paid my way basically to finish up the coursework for the PhD. I went to Brooklyn Polytechnic. And that choice was because I was in a microwave lab at RCA. And at Brooklyn Poly, they had many textbooks by professors there in that field. And so I commuted to Brooklyn,
From New Jersey?
From New Jersey. And finished up the coursework and the preliminary examination for the PhD. During that time, I was on the fellowship.
And not that I would really understand it, but can you tell us a little bit about your thesis, its title, and what the focus was?
Well, the title was Effects of Asymmetry in Diffraction Gratings. It was a theoretical analysis of the effects of asymmetry in diffraction gratings.
Perfectly simple. Now, so what was your second career choice and why the change after 8 years in engineering?
Well, I gradually became less and less interested in what I was doing. I use the word bored. I can't think of a better word to describe my feeling at the time. And then I became involved in some local political efforts, mainly an effort to consolidate two municipalities which had duplicate services. And it made sense to many of us on this project to combine the municipalities so we didn't have to have two fire departments and two police departments serving essentially the same community. And in connection with that political effort, I rubbed shoulders with many lawyers. And I thought, I think they're having more fun at their job than I'm having at mine. And interestingly enough, way back as a sophomore in college, I had these thoughts, I think I would enjoy being a lawyer. And I remember talking to some of my fraternity brothers about that, and they all said, oh, it's too late. It's too late to make a change. You're already, second year of engineering. And finally, after 8 years working in the engineering field, I decided to make the change.
And so you went home and told your wife, Jan.
Well, we discussed it. I didn't tell her. I mean, she was very, very supportive. I've been forever so grateful for her support. I mean, we just uprooted ourselves. We sold our house, one of our 2 cars, and we didn't sell the children or the dogs.
That's good. That's good.
We sold much of our furniture, and we moved to California to go to law school.
Yeah, and that was an interesting choice. You and Jan both grew up in Michigan.
Yes.
You moved to New Jersey, and then you came to California to go to law school. Any particular reason?
Well, essentially, when I was working, the sort of work I was doing with RCA, there was only about 6 places in the entire country where I could do that sort of work. And I thought, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I can live anywhere. Not limited to these 6 places. Outside of universities would be a possibility. And in the meantime, my mother and father had moved and retired to California. My older brother had set up his medical practice in Central California. And so it was sort of a natural place to think about practicing law eventually.
Okay, and so where did you go to law school?
Hastings in San Francisco, UC Hastings.
And when you were in law school, did you have ideas about what kind of law you wanted to practice when you graduated?
Not initially, but I do remember thinking seriously that estate planning kind of fascinated me, believe it or not. I had a trust and estates course from a professor named Richard R.B. Powell. You may have seen in some of your travels, a 8-foot shelf of books called Powell on Property. Well, he was the one, and excellent professor. And I thought estate planning was a possibility, or being a tax lawyer. That was my initial thought.
Interesting that you left engineering because you thought it was a little boring and were thinking about estate planning and tax. Not that those aren't intellectually very challenging, but they're usually not a hotbed of controversy. But you didn't end up doing either of those things.
No, I didn't.
So what changed? What happened?
Well, I clerked at a firm in San Francisco, a fairly large firm, large at that time, during the summer after my second year in law school. And during that time, I was involved in a case with a partner in some probate litigation, of all things. And it was just fascinating. The problem we had in that case, I still remember pieces of it, were like a law school exam. We had a decedent who was killed in an airplane crash in England, domiciled nowhere. He was sort of a child of the world. He lived month to month in different places all over the world. But he left a property in California with a brother in California and a spouse. At least the spouse claimed she was still a spouse because the decedent had secured a quickie divorce on the island of Haiti. And so we were trying to demonstrate to the court that the brother in California was the appropriate administrator of the estate. And so during that time, that summer, I was assigned several tasks concerning how we get certain kinds of evidence in. And then I attended the trial with a partner who was doing this. I don't remember how the case came out or whether it was even decided while I was there. But I thought to myself, this is what lawyers really do. They go to court. And so I decided I'm going to go to court. I'm going to be a litigator, a trial guy.
And it sounds like it was sort of the legal equivalent of a Rubik's Cube, twisting all the different parts, trying to find the solution.
Yeah, it sort of was. It was a fascinating case, actually.
So when you graduated from law school and now you've decided you're looking for a litigation firm, where was the first firm you practiced?
Well, I had an offer from that firm in San Francisco, and I had not given them an answer immediately. And I was working on the Hastings Law Journal at the time, and they posted notices on the bulletin board about firms coming to interview on campus. And I saw this rather smallish firm from Santa Ana, California show up. And I thought, that's interesting. I asked somebody, where is Santa Ana? And they said, well, it's down there in Orange County, Disneyland area. So that's interesting because most of the firms that come on campus interviewing were larger firms. Well, I signed up mostly out of curiosity. And they invited me down to Santa Ana for an interview. And I found that I hit it off with all those people in the firm. I just hit it off. And I remember talking to Jan, my wife, about it and said, you know, if I go with a large firm, partnership track is usually 7 or 8 years, or that's what it was at the time. I was older. I was going to turn 34 when I graduated from law school. And I thought, you know, if I go with a smaller firm, it's likely that I can be on a partnership track earlier. And that turned out to be really true. So we made the decision to come to Orange County.
And I know you've said many times how appreciative you are of all the support Jan has given you in your somewhat circuitous career path and your moves all over. And while you were in law school, Jan was working, wasn't she, to try and help support the family?
Not much.
Okay.
She did a little bit of work. She worked in a doctor's office as a front office person for a time. But mostly we got through law school on the capital gain we made in the sale of our New Jersey house. That essentially financed our way through law school. And we came out of law school penniless, essentially, having used all of that money.
And then came to Orange County to get into the Orange County housing market.
Yes.
It was a little better than when you came than it is now.
It certainly was.
Okay. And so you settled in Orange County now with 2 little girls.
Yes.
And what was the name of the firm you started with?
At that time it was Wenke, Burge, and Taylor.
Okay. And then you made some changes in firms over the years.
Well, that firm sort of evolved as some of the name partners left. It became Wenke, Taylor, Evans, and Ikola for a while. This is I was made partner, I think it was 3.5 years. It became Wenke, Taylor, Evans, and Ikola. And then eventually Gary Taylor, went to the Superior Court as a judge, and then shortly thereafter became a U.S. District Judge here in Santa Ana. And then Bill Wenke, the other named partner, left, I think it was about 1986, to go back to his alma mater, University of Nebraska, to head up their charitable foundation.
And at some point, I know before you came on, you left Snell and Wilmer to come on the bench.
Yes.
Was there anything between?
Yes.
Okay.
Somewhere around 1987 or 86 or 87, my younger partners thought they would like to merge with a larger firm. And so we were approached actually by a branch office from a firm in Los Angeles known as Huffstedler, Kaus, and Beardsley. And so we voted, I shouldn't say we voted, actually my partners voted to join that firm. I was the only dissenting vote, mostly because I liked, being in charge of my own life without the trappings of a larger firm. But I went with my partners, so we merged with the Huffstedler group. It didn't last long. We had some issues that could not be resolved, and so in 1990, we were approached by Snell and Wilmer, who had a Phoenix-based firm at that time, and they had established an outpost in Orange County about 18 months before that. And so they were looking to build the office, and so as a group, we moved over to Snell and Wilmer.
You are sort of atypical, because I think of someone from the Midwest, from the UP, engineering background. You would think that that person would not be a risk taker, that they would be, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And yet you've never hesitated making a change if you thought it was the right thing to do. Why do you think that is? And Jan's always supported you.
Well, the biggest change, of course, was leaving my career in New Jersey and going to law school.
Uh-huh.
And I was young, and young people take risks. And I remember, I should say that you mentioned that I went on to get my PhD. I had been lumbering along, literally, with my dissertation. I had finished all the requirements for the degree, but the dissertation, I was working full-time, and it was taking some time to get it done. So when I made the decision to go to law school, I thought, I'm going to be competing with all these people who came out of a liberal arts background, who have written essays all their life. I'd never written an essay exam as an engineering student. I thought, you know, despite my thought that I would enjoy this, maybe I'm no good at it. And so I better finish that PhD. So I put my pedal to the metal during that last year before starting law school and finished the dissertation.
So you don't take these leaps without a lot of preparation and strategic thinking.
Well, that was a little, you know, a safety net if it didn't work out as a lawyer. As it turned out, I did perfectly well in law school. In fact, I did very well.
By all accounts, and I've heard this from lawyers, judges, you were a very busy and extremely successful trial lawyer. Something that a lot of people don't like doing is trying cases and actually being in a courtroom. Did you enjoy trying cases?
Oh, very much. It was it's just one of those things that you either enjoy or you don't, I guess. And I really did enjoy it. And when I joined the Wenke, Burge & Taylor firm at that time, Bill Wenke, the most senior partner, had pretty much he had attracted some very large marital dissolution cases, and he was pretty much going in that direction full time. And he had many business clients also at the time that he needed to service. And at that time also, one of the associates in the firm who was doing the business litigation left to form his own office. And so there was a need for people to handle these cases. And I was there, and so I think in the first 2 years, I think I recollect that I tried about 18 cases or arbitrations. Not many of them were large cases. Many of them were municipal court cases, little disputes between subcontractors and contractors. But it was a great experience, great training.
Little cases, but big cases to the clients.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I think that qualifies you as a trial horse. 18 cases in a couple of years, large or small cases. Well,
it slowed down after that because, you know, I was doing larger cases and you can't do that many cases with that frequency.
Okay, so these cases that you tried as a lawyer, do any of them stand out in your mind that you, for any reason, you know, intellectually challenging, kind of interesting facts?
Well, I had, in the early 1980s, I had 2 cases that were really quite public, generated a lot of publicity. So I remember those cases. One was a case, we brought a class action on behalf of the residential leaseholders of the Irvine Company in Irvine and Newport Beach. It turned out that probably around the mid-1950s, the Irvine Company, which is a large landowner in Orange County, began doing residential developments by building houses on land that was leased to the residents. So the residents would buy their home, but the land would be leased, and they paid ground rent to the Irvine Company. All those ground leases had clauses in them that required a readjustment of the rent in typically 25 years, sometimes 30 years. And so from the 1950s to the early 1980s, those leases were being readjusted. And the poster child for this phenomenon was a fellow who was paying, as I recall, about $1,000 a year in land rent, and he was readjusted to $80,000.
Wow.
Which was more than the individual salary. So the community was up in arms about this because it was just threatening people with loss of their homes. And so we filed a lawsuit, a class action against the Irvine Company. And it wound up getting settled on terms that were, I think, quite favorable, both for the Irvine Company and for the landowners or leaseholders.
It's kind of a David and Goliath story.
In a way it was, but part of the reason it eventually settled, I believe, was not only the lawsuit, the threat of the lawsuit, but Irvine Company changed hands at about that time. the ownership changed, and I think the new owner was very anxious to put this big public dispute in the rearview mirror. So we did it.
What, any other cases?
Well, the other case that was quite interesting, at about that time I was doing some work in the air industry, air transportation industry, in a couple of different capacities, but American Airlines retained our office, and me specifically, when they were having difficulty serving the Orange County Airport, now known as the John Wayne Airport. And the Orange County Board of Supervisors at the time were being somewhat protective of some local power brokers, if you will, wealthy owners of a airline then known as Air California, who did not particularly want competition at the John Wayne Airport. So we successfully got an injunction requiring the County of Orange to allow American to commence service. And that was a very public dispute. And
it's very time sensitive too. I think, weren't you rushing to get papers filed in that case?
Well, yeah, what happened was we had obtained I think what stage was it? I think it's either a temporary restraining order, maybe we had the preliminary injunction at the time, restraining the County of Orange from preventing American Airlines from flying from the airport. Just a few days before we were to commence service, and of course American had already sold tickets for the flight, initial flights, the station manager for American came running to me saying, the airport manager just dropped by and said, well, you know, you have an injunction requiring us to allow you to fly your airplanes, but you don't have an operating agreement with us, so we can't allow passengers to be boarded.
Those are the exciting, dynamic things that happen in trial practice
It
probably made it very enjoyable for you.
It was really quite a stunning, so we stayed up all night. No, actually, then what happened, I'm recalling now, the County of Orange appealed to the Ninth Circuit on the preliminary injunction. And the Ninth Circuit stayed. This was after we had overcome the station manager's concern about not letting passengers board the planes. But the Ninth Circuit had stayed then the injunction pending the appeal. Well, so when that happened, this was just I think 3 days before the flight. It was pretty exciting. So we stayed up all night after that stay order came out, doing an ex parte application to vacate the stay based on the immediacy of these flights and the passengers and their plans being shattered and all of that. And funny thing about that, I remember we were up all night drafting these papers, and what color covers do we have to have? and it was about 2 or 3 in the morning, and we looked around. We turned out it was red, as I recall. We didn't have any red covers in the office. We had a word processing operator at the time. You know, people didn't have computers. We had a dedicated word processing operator. She said, you know, my daughter has some red construction paper at home. She went home, picked up some red construction paper, and we filed in the Ninth Circuit at 8 o'clock the next morning in the Los Angeles clerk's office with red construction paper covers.
See, I can see you were having much more fun as a lawyer than you ever would have had as an engineer.
So much fun.
So much fun, and yet at some point you decided to apply to the bench.
I did.
Okay.
By the way, to finish that story,
yes,
we did get the stay order vacated on a 2-to-1 decision.
And I didn't mean to jump ahead. Any other cases you want to talk about?
No, there are other cases that I haven't had so much fun with, but that's enough.
Okay. There's only so much fun we can talk about. This is a
Exactly.
serious interview. Now, I think you made another partnership decision in terms of you went home and talked to Jan, I assume, about a judgeship. And what precipitated that conversation?
Well, it's interesting. I was I was working along at Snell and Wilmer, and then one day I get a call from Bill Wenke, the former senior partner. I hadn't seen him for many months, and out of the blue he calls and says, we chatted for a while, and he said, Ray, have you ever thought about going on the bench? And I said, no, not really. He said, yeah, I think you ought to give it a try. I said, really? You think so? And he said, yeah, I think you should. So I hung up the phone after the conversation. I sat there thinking, I really had not considered that path. But I enjoy the courtroom so much. Maybe I should consider that. So I called my wife Jan. I said, hon, let's go out for dinner tonight. We were members of the Center Club at the time, so we had dinner at the Center Club. And I said, this is something maybe I should give a shot at. And she said, go for it. So that was the decision we made, and so I put in my application.
Okay, well, let's go diverge a little bit, and talk about your personal life, a little away from your professional life, because we've talked about Jan, who's your wife of how many years?
58.
Yes, and I know that you proposed to Jan and married her when you were at Michigan, and the
Yes.
reason I know that is because when I visited the Michigan campus with you, you and Jan showed me the very spot where you proposed.
Yes, I remember it well.
And lots of memories from the Michigan campus. Wasn't there also a memory with a presidential candidate at the Michigan campus?
Oh, actually, I hadn't thought about that for a while, but I'm trying to think, I guess it was 1959. No, 60. When was the election? I think it was 1960. 60. John F. Kennedy was elected in 60, right?
Right. So it would have been...
So I think it was then the fall of 1960 during the campaign. John F. Kennedy had debated Richard Nixon on TV. It was the first TV debates, the presidential debates. And after the debate, one of the debates, John Kennedy was going to stay at the Michigan Union overnight. And so the word was out that John Kennedy was going to be staying at the Michigan Union, so lots of students turned out to see John Kennedy. And so I was standing just near the steps of the Michigan Union at 2 in the morning. When John Kennedy's car rolled up, he got out and he walked up the steps of the Michigan Union and stood there and addressed the gathered students. And I was about 30 feet away. And that's when he proposed the formation of the Peace Corps. And to this day, there's a plaque at the Michigan Union steps showing where he stood when he proposed the Peace Corps.
So you are a very proud graduate of the University of Michigan and have many great memories. Lots of good things happened to you at Michigan. But let's talk about your daughters. You have 2 daughters, Kristen and Kathy.
2 daughters, Kristen and Kathy, yes.
And multiple grandchildren.
5.
Okay. You want to tell us a little bit about them?
Well, Kristen, the older daughter, is now a lawyer, a tax lawyer. She works at a large retailer in-house doing tax work.
Must have been in her genes. You
Maybe.
weren't the tax lawyer, so she had to be a tax lawyer.
I don't know. And my younger daughter, Kathy, is a high school English teacher and also part-time director of Christian education at her church.
Okay. And the grandkids are doing all kinds of different things.
My oldest grandson is now a forensic scientist with the California Department of Justice at a regional lab in Redding, way up in Northern California, north of Sacramento. The next oldest grandson just finished at UCLA with a degree in nursing.
And Jan studied nursing.
Yes.
So the science, nursing, it's in the blood.
Maybe. Mm-hmm. And the next granddaughter, now it's a granddaughter time, is in her junior year at UCLA studying English. And I just learned that she will probably finish her degree in 3 years and a summer. So she's finishing rather quickly. Then going to Kristen's family, her oldest daughter, just finishing her freshman year at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, North Carolina.
She's a very talented theatrical artist.
Yes, although she having second thoughts about going into the acting business. She thinks maybe she's better suited to be a director or writer. She's an active writer, so.
But she's only 19 and she comes from a family where her grandfather was never afraid to make a change. So I suspect she's not afraid to make a change if she thinks it's warranted.
Maybe that's in the genes too.
Yeah, you've set a good example, you and Jan both have.
And then my fifth grandson, is a sophomore in high school.
Okay, now back to the professional side. So you applied for an appointment to the bench, and my recollection is the time between your application and direct appointment to the Superior Court was relatively short?
No, it was relatively long. It was about 30 months, 2.5 years.
Okay. But you were appointed directly to the Superior Court.
Yes.
You were not appointed to the Municipal Court.
That's true.
And when you went to the Superior Court, you were assigned immediately to the civil panel.
Immediately the civil panel. I was sworn in at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I went to, as I recall, Department 8 of the Superior Court, and about 9 o'clock, in walked the case ready to be tried.
You probably didn't bat an eye.
It was a pretty simple case.
What about the transition from being a trial attorney, being an advocate, now you're the neutral trial judge?
To me, it was a very smooth, easy transition. The courtroom was familiar territory to me. I was playing a different role. I now had the best seat in the House. I didn't have near the tension that trial lawyers have. And it was just a thoroughly enjoyable job.
What about the tendency to want to jump in? I mean, if you're an experienced trial lawyer...
Oh, no. I knew as a trial lawyer, you don't want the judge jumping in.
So your experience as a trial lawyer really...
Unless it's necessary to control the proceeding or some reason, but actually, let the lawyers try their case was my best philosophy.
So your experience as a trial lawyer really educated you in terms of what the perfect judge was?
I hope so. I think so.
Okay. And then you were on the civil panel for how long?
5 years.
Okay.
5 years.
And then you went to the complex civil panel, which is long cause civil cases.
Yeah, so the last 2 years was on the complex civil panel. I had been supervising judge of the civil panel the year before. And then I went to the complex panel. The PJ gave me a choice. You want to supervise civil panel another year or 2 years, or you want to go to the complex panel? So I chose the complex panel.
I remember when I was the presiding judge of the Superior Court, the assistant presiding judge, Bob Jameson, was elected. And he had been the supervising judge in civil. And I said, well, Bob, you're not going to be able to do that in January because you'll be the assistant presiding judge. Who should I have supervise civil? And without missing a beat, he said, oh, it has to be Ray Ikola. So had he discussed that with you before, or was it a surprise?
No, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Well, he had absolutely no hesitation as far as he was concerned. There were no other choices. So, but you didn't last a long time as a supervising judge because you did decide to go to complex.
I did go to complex, right.
Okay. What about cases either on the civil panel or on the complex panel that were of particular interest to you, or interesting facts or amusing memories?
Well, there was a memorable case. A couple of them actually. You mentioned Bob Jameson. While he was serving on the civil panel, he had concluded that an insurance company defendant was not complying with their discovery obligations to the point where he decided to strike their answer, this insurance company's answer, and do a default prove-up. And he hit the insurance company on a default basis with a $61 million judgment. And it went up to this court, and it was reversed on due process grounds. It was after that that the legislature enacted a provision requiring notice of how much you were seeking in punitive damages before doing the default. But at that time, there was no such provision. And So as a reverse, they came back. By that time, I was on the court, and the case got assigned to me to retry. And the thing I remember about the case was about 3 days into the trial, and we had some very good trial lawyers on the case. 3 days into the trial, I called counsel back to chambers and said, you know, counsel, I'm going to put out a mediator's proposal here because I think this case could be settled if you both take this proposal back to your clients and see whether it works. So I thought, I think this case ought to be settled for $4 million. And so report to me in the morning what your clients think about that. Next morning, and of course that was private, the one side would not know the other side's answer. The plaintiff told me, we'll take the $4 million. The defense lawyer said, no, my client will not do the $4 million. I said, okay, onward. And so we finished the case, tried the case. Jury was out deliberating and finally came back with a verdict. And the clerk or the bailiff handed the verdict to me, and I looked at it and I almost broke out laughing. And then I handed it to the clerk. He read the verdict. It was $4,060,000.
So you were off by $60,000.
I was off by $60,000 on a $4 million verdict. Indeed, it was quite. Both lawyers actually, I could see them grinning. I mean, even the defense lawyer, because it was so serendipitous.
Having been an experienced trial lawyer, though, I bet that assisted you in sort of evaluating a case. You'd probably settled a lot of cases and tried a lot of cases, so you knew the value of a case.
Well, but I've guessed wrong too. But that was clearly a very, very accurate forecast. Any
other cases?
Well, there was a case I remember quite well that the testimony could form the basis of a good movie, actually.
Well, let's hear about that one then.
Well, I can't remember all the details, but the plaintiff was from Iran. He was a wrestler.
It's a good story.
He had defected from Iran, actually. He was in the Iranian military, and he had come to Venezuela with a team of wrestlers from Iran, to participate in some sort of world military wrestling championship. And he and his partner, according to the testimony, then at that time decided to defect. And it was a very interesting story how all that happened and how they arranged to defect. But one of the things in the background of this was that his father, the Iranian wrestler's father, and uncle were important people, should I say, in the Islamic government. His father was the equivalent of what we would call the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and his uncle was a high military officer. And he testified, you wonder why this is relevant, and I'd have to tell more of the story to tell you why it was relevant. But he testified that his mother, in a phone call from Iran, had told him after he defected that his father and his uncle had laid their hands on the Quran and swore an oath that if they ever get their hands on him, they'll kill him.
Wow.
Well, with that background, one day he gets police from the LA Police Department break into his apartment and arrest him on charges of transporting heroin. Turned out that he fought the charge, and he was represented by Jim Stotler, who later became a Superior Court judge, and he was acquitted. It turned out that they were able to demonstrate that the transportation of the heroin he had allegedly engaged in had been a setup by the Los Angeles Police Department, where one confidential informant had set it up to send the drugs to another confidential informant. At any rate, why this background? It turned out that this arrest had happened, as I recall, about 1 week before he was to sit down for his citizenship, final interview for citizenship, United States citizenship.
Which was very important to him because he couldn't go back to Iran, it doesn't sound like.
Well, it was doubly important because he was not only a wrestler, he was a very good wrestler. And he was about to try out for the U.S. Olympic team. I think it was the 1980 Olympics in Seoul, Korea, as I recall. And because of the arrest, he could not have this interview. That was put on hold. So he could not go to the Olympics. And he testified about how he sat on television watching people who he had defeated in wrestling matches in the United States win medals at the Olympics. And this was a very long story, but fascinating. It was almost, and I haven't told you the half of what the testimony showed. At any rate, this had a background then legally. The case had been tried some years earlier by another Orange County Superior Court judge.
And the case was a suit against the Los Angeles Police Department?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And one of its detectives individually. And the case had resulted in $1 million verdict in favor of the plaintiff. It had gone up to the California Supreme Court, who reversed it on instructional error and sent it back for trial only on damages. They affirmed the liability finding. And so the case I had then was a trial on the damages. And after hearing the case again, the New Jersey jury returned a verdict of $3 million. They managed to triple the damages from the first trial.
Well, it is a pretty compelling story.
It was a very compelling story, and a memorable one.
What could have been a tragedy, but it sounds like there was a happy ending.
Yeah.
And I assume that verdict, to the best of your knowledge, was not overturned on appeal?
It was affirmed.
Good. Any other cases from the trial court?
There are lots of other cases, but
None.
enough reminiscences on cases, I think.
Okay. So in December of 2002, you're appointed to the appellate court. So you leave the trial court and you join us here at the Court of Appeal. Any thoughts in terms of your transition from the trial court to the appellate court? It sounds like you were having a lot of fun in the trial court with some pretty interesting cases, and you're right in the thick of the battle. And then you come to the Court of Appeal, and we're a little quieter over here.
Well, I said the transition from being a trial guy to a trial judge was seamless. Coming to the Court of Appeal, it was like jumping into a cold bath because it's very different. As you know, the job here is just totally different than being a trial judge. So it took some getting used to, and it took a few months. You don't have cases coming at you from the back end until you've been here for a while. So it's kind of slow. But then it picks up.
Yeah, when I first came, I thought it was kind of slow, and I thought, boy, I have to get involved in more committees and teach more classes. And then a year later, I thought, what was I thinking? So yeah, the cases do catch up with you. We, on the trial court, rarely know what's going on in other judges' courtrooms. I mean, you don't get a chance to go sit and listen to other judges' trials. Occasionally, they'll tell you stories in the lunchroom. When you came here, I was surprised, I suspect you were, when you started reading other people's trials. It was illuminating in certain respects.
Yes, it is. That's true. That's true.
Now, you've been here, you have been a judge for over 20 years, between the trial court and your tenure here in the Court of Appeal. It's actually the longest time you've stayed with the job, isn't it? I mean, changing firms and things.
16 years here at this court. That may be my longest stay in one place.
Okay, so you must like the job?
Oh, I love it. It's a very different job than being a trial judge, but it's just very satisfying.
What continues to interest you? I mean, what do you like about the job?
The variety. You would think, the state has about 40 million people, I think, California, just maybe just shy of 40 million. And you would think with that kind of population that all the kinds of disputes that man could create have been litigated and decided, but it just isn't so. There are just new ways that people can get into trouble or generate a dispute, and never ceases to amaze me, the things people do and the jams they get in and how the law is going to deal with it.
And the Court of Appeal does offer you an occasional probate case, so I guess you get to satisfy that interest in estate planning occasionally, but...
Actually, there are some interesting probate cases. Strangely enough, some interesting cases do come out of probate.
And in terms of tax cases, they're usually state tax and...
We don't see many of those. I think I've seen a sales tax case here or there.
Yeah. The big tax cases go across the street to the federal court.
I think so.
That doesn't disappoint you now?
No, not at all.
What aspect, there has to be something about this job that you either dislike or don't like quite as much as other aspects?
Not really. I'm just a happy camper here. I don't have any dislikes.
Honestly, on all the years that I've worked with you on the appellate court, I really don't think I ever have heard you express a preference for business litigation cases, criminal cases, probate cases. You do them all. Any area of the law interest you more than another?
At the moment, no. I really do enjoy all the cases, and I find challenges in each type of case that comes our way. Let me say one thing. I do have a dislike.
Okay.
The California Environmental Quality Act and cases that come up from decisions under CEQA, as it's called, are tedious.
Because they usually come with boxes and boxes of administrative record?
Huge administrative records and things that aren't typically exciting, like traffic studies or what's going to happen in the California gnatcatcher if this golf course is built. It's tedious going through those cases.
But you handle those cases just like every other case, don't you?
Well, you've got to. Just dig in and do it.
Now, during your tenure on the trial court and the appellate court, you've spent a considerable amount of time and devoted a lot of effort to different judicial council advisory committees. Can you tell us about those committees?
Well, I think the first committee I served on at that time it was called the Court Technology Advisory Committee, and its task was to address issues involving technology and in the implementation of various technologies in the courts, both trial and appellate. At that time, the judicial branch was also involved in developing a system known as CCMS, California Case Management System. And although the Court Technology Committee was not charged with overseeing that project, we got regular reports on it. I think there was a task force that was actually pursuing that project. So that was interesting, and eventually the whole project crashed and burned. It was unfortunate in my view, but that's what happened.
Yeah, because we have the appellate court case management system here that works quite well.
Yes. Well, the CCMS system was a massive, massive undertaking. It sought to integrate not only the trial courts, the appellate courts, but the district attorney's office, the attorney general's office, police departments, all law enforcement partners, the California Highway Patrol. It was just a massive undertaking.
So sometimes projects are too ambitious, maybe.
That may have been part of it.
The other project that I think you've spent a lot of time on over the years is volunteering as a judge for the Constitutional Rights Foundation mock trial program. I know you've been selected to judge the statewide competitions for CRF twice, and you've been selected as their Judge of the Year 2, maybe 3 times. So why the commitment to CRF and mock trials?
Well, it turns out that I really enjoyed it. Watching these young people, high school students, perform with the mock trial, it's just very satisfying. It's kind of, it makes you, hopeful for the future when you see young people performing at that level. Such bright people and doing so well in presenting a mock trial and absorbing, the law that they have to learn in order to do this well. And it's just very satisfying to watch that process.
Okay, so in addition to knowing that you are very smart and very hardworking, I know you hate it when I call you a brainiac, but I do think you are a brainiac. But I've come to learn that you're kind of a Renaissance man. You served as president and chair of the board of the Pacific Symphony during its early years in the 1980s. That's something a little different. What was the source of your interest in the symphony? The marching band?
Well, I had, believe it or not, in high school considered going into music as a career at one time. But as I've described earlier, that never happened. But I've always enjoyed classical music. And one day I was sitting in my office, and an individual who happened to be the manager of a large shopping center here in Orange County was in talking about a problem that, I forget what the problem was, but the problem the shopping center was facing. And suddenly this individual said, "Do you like classical music?" I said, "Well, yes." He said, "Well, do you know about the Pacific Symphony?" I said, "Well, no." He said, so he described this fledgling orchestra that was then, I think, 2 years old or something, and said, "You know, you ought to try one of our concerts." So I did. Jen and I went to a concert, and I was kind of blown away. They were really good. And so then, I forget how it was, I wound up on the board, and eventually I was the president of the board and then chair of the board about the time that the Performing Arts Center was completed in Costa Mesa. And I left the board shortly after that. But in those early years, it was an exciting process building this symphony, support-wise, not musical-wise.
You're a person that likes to stay busy. I mean, you engage in a variety of hobbies in addition to all the volunteer work and the committee work. I know you've been involved in photography, you've been involved in woodworking, a variety of general home improvement projects. I can remember you coming to work on a Monday telling me about changing out all the doors in your house, not because you couldn't afford to have someone do it, but you seemed to think that was fun. I remember you telling me that you changed the light in your swimming pool yourself, again, just because you thought it would be fun. Why don't you just use your weekends to, relax and put your feet up?
Well, I don't know. In terms of home improvement projects, that was true. There were 18 interior doors. I still remember the number, 18 interior doors. And in the house we were living in, it turned out that the rough opening for the doors did not match standard doors. And so I had to do a lot of planing to get the doors, the standard doors, to fit. It was a big job. I did all the baseboard as well.
I remember you coming in on Mondays with a few aches and pains, but laughing about how, you had to plane doors to fit and how challenges you would come into, and things I've learned over the weekend about base moldings or doors. So you just like doing those things.
Well, I've often said there are two kinds of people in the world, those who like to build things and people who couldn't care less about building things. And I've always enjoyed building things. So I took up woodworking at some point. I've been doing that for 8 or 9 years now. And I still do some woodworking. And
then there is another interest in your life, and I think this might be the high point of the interview. It's obviously you love your wife very much and your family, and it appears you love your job. But there's one more significant love in your life, and that would be Michigan football, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so tell us about the love affair you have with Michigan football and the Big House.
Well, it's strange. I went to all the football games when I was a student, of course, and then I didn't go to a Michigan football game for years and years. And then one year, I was going to the University of Illinois to interview at their law school, interview students on behalf of the firm I was with. And I thought, since I'm going back to the Midwest for this interview, the timing was right that I thought I could swing by Ann Arbor and see a Michigan football game. I thought that'd be kind of cool. So, and Jan went with me. So we went and saw, I think Michigan played Wake Forest at that game. And so I thoroughly enjoyed it. I came back and I thought, it's hard to get individual tickets, at face value. So I thought maybe I should just get, a season ticket. If I get back a couple times a year, that's all, it'd be fun. So I applied for season tickets. It took me 6 years before I got my season tickets. And so I've held season tickets now for Michigan football for, I think this is my 26th year. And I just thoroughly enjoy the whole atmosphere, the whole experience. It's just so much fun going to a college football game on a big stadium like Michigan's.
Yes, through rain or sleet or snow. It doesn't make any difference to you, does it?
Oh, I've sat through some pretty awful weather. Sleet, snow.
I know Bob Jameson has a famous video of the two of you sitting watching a Michigan football game as the players were making snow angels on the field.
That was after the game, yes.
Anything else that we should cover that we haven't covered? I mean, we could talk about all the memorabilia you have in your chambers from Michigan, but then that would take another hour, so I think we'll skip that. But anything else you want to tell us about your career?
A couple other committees maybe I served on. The Appellate Advisory Committee to Judicial Council. I chaired that committee for, I think, 3 years. Working with all the rules, the appellate rules court. And then the California Civil Jury Instruction Committee. It's a very satisfying committee. I served on that for 9 years. It was a very good experience.
That's kind of like diagramming sentences. It's very engineer-like, I think.
Well, I don't know. But I think that pretty much tells the story of my career.
Okay, well, Ray, thanks for sharing your story with me, and I hope that this will illuminate your career for anyone who chooses to watch the video. I think you're a person who's extremely well educated, although the education never ends with you. You're always learning new things. You're always inquisitive about something new. You have so many talents and interests, and yet you're comfortable in a symphony hall, and yet you're also comfortable sitting in the snow at a Michigan football game. You really are, I think, a Renaissance person. And despite all of these attributes, you're one of the most self-effacing people I know. So thank you so much for sitting for this interview, and go Blue.
Go Blue.